Well, good morning, everyone. I say again, good morning. I sure hope each of y'all are well and staying warm and safe. You know, when I was originally putting together my thoughts about this lesson, I was going to say a few words about us being in a new year, in a pandemic. I was going to avoid politics. Uh, and I was going to comment on about how fast time seems to be flying. But then the really big deal this week is this Arctic blast. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it in the state of Texas anyway. I hope each of you have found ways to stay warm during these rolling outages. Some of you may not have experienced any outages. We certainly have. Now, I hope by the time you're watching this the weather has improved and the power is back on for everybody. It's Thursday morning as I'm recording this. Not only has this week been a wreck relative to the weather, but as all of you know by now, we lost Kathy's Aunt Mary this past week, or this week. Mary had turned 101 about a month ago. Without a doubt, Mary had a very interesting life, and she was a very interesting woman. She was never married, but traveled the world. She could tell stories of places she had visited and people that she had met. I don't remember a time where you couldn't ask about some place that she couldn't tell about having been there. For those of you who don't know anything about Mary Lorraine Smith, she was a professional journalist and photographer for McGraw-Hill. Her articles and photos appeared in some of the finest magazines in the world. Unfortunately, it was her time now, but still, I know Kathy and her mom are going to miss her, and just pray for your continued prayers for both of them. And of course, how could I forget to mention the swan dive my bride took earlier this week in the bathroom, breaking her ankle and dislocating it in the process. I don't want to go into too much details, but if you looked at the foot, it was 90 degrees off kilter. It's supposed to be pointing straight ahead, and it was pointing to the left. Kathy will have to have surgery. We have an appointment tomorrow with a surgeon, but ultimately she should be just fine. I mentioned the pandemic. The good news is that many of us are finding ways to get the vaccine, which is wonderful. I'm pleased to tell you that Kathy and her mom and I both had both shots, the Moderna vaccine. We feel very lucky and blessed, but we're still quite anxious. I know many of you have had both shots, or at least first shot. And even though we've had both shots, the CDC continues to recommend that we wear a mask and social distance. Aside from the few occasions we've gotten together with our family over the past year, it's always been outdoors and social distancing. You know, one of the worst things this past year, I have not been able to hug my grandchildren in a year now. And that's just terrible. I hate it. I miss it. I miss it so much. Lastly, I wanted to say something about church and Sunday school and our monthly socials. It's a shame that it's taken a pandemic to remind me and maybe all of us just how much of a blessing our socials have been to us. Maybe later this year, who knows? I know Gigi and I and some others have been talking about maybe something we can do in the spring. I hope it comes about. So what does this have to do with my lesson? Maybe nothing, maybe a lot. I want to tell you a short story about a colleague of mine that I worked with the last couple of years before I retired from AT&T. Her name was Donna Giesler. Basically, I had all the outside network people and Donna had all the inside network people for the 5 states of what used to be called Southwestern Bell. We both reported to Van Taylor, who is president of the network. Donna had a couple of funny traits. One of them, whenever she would see me, she would remind me that I was her favorite. But then I'd catch her because we'd be in a staff meeting with my boss and she would be telling everybody else that they were her favorite. She had a lot of fun with this, and we had a lot of fun with her. But the other somewhat funny thing Donna would always seem to say, or especially when people were involved, she would say, quote unquote, people are no damn good. Now, Donna meant this to be funny, at least I hope so. But even so, I've remembered this for the past 20 years or longer. So, what does all of this ramble have to do with my lesson? Good question, Harry. I'm glad you asked. As I was pondering what to use as lesson material back in December, I kept remembering what Donna would say: people are no damn good. I found myself thinking of a Bible study that I had taught to the men's Bible study group almost 15 years ago now. I don't really remember, but it was a book by Tony Dungy called Uncommon. I'm confident that Harry Hickson and Jim Monroe remember this study and hopefully the book. Now, this book was originally intended as a men's Bible study, but I'm confident that the message in this book applies to anyone and everyone. My lesson today, and I may opt to bring additional lessons at some point in the future, comes from this book. Before I get into my lesson, I want to introduce Tony Dungy, so to speak. For those of you who aren't football fanatics, like my wife, Tony is a black man who was the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts when they won the Super Bowl in 2006. At the time, Tony was the first black head coach ever to win a Super Bowl. But more importantly, and something I hope to convey this morning and in future lessons, Tony was way more focused on his faith rather than his accomplishments on the football field. Now, don't get me wrong, football's still important to Tony, very important. But since he's left coaching, he's worked very hard to bring young men closer to Christ. So I think it's very appropriate that this uncommon man wrote a Bible study titled Uncommon. In just a minute, I'm going to show you a couple of photos, real quick photos of Tony and his family. Besides his faith, the most important thing in Tony's life is his family. I think it's appropriate to get to know him just a bit, if only through a couple of photos. So here goes. I hope these photos kind of gave you a quick peek into who Tony Dungy is. He's a person that I've come to really admire and to follow. Regarding Tony's book Uncommon, it has a total of 7 major sections with a total of 31 chapters. So it's quite a bit of material. To put it mildly, it contains ample subject material for a lot of lessons. So if this lesson works out okay, as I hope it does, then I may use it again. Today, I'm going to focus on the first main section titled Developing Your Core. Topics that I'm going to address today include character, honesty, integrity, and humility. Just to give you a taste of the other major topics in the book: loving your family, 3 chapters; lifting your friends and others, 4 chapters; reaching your full potential, 6 chapters; establishing a mission that matters, 5 chapters; choosing influence over image, 4 chapters; and then living your faith, 5 chapters. I know I'm taking too long to get to my material, so I apologize. But back when I was teaching the men's Bible study many years ago, we briefly entertained and attempted to get Ron Henderson support in sponsoring a county-wide men's event, an event featuring Tony Dungy. I was convinced at the time, and I'm still convinced today, that had we been able to pull this off, we could have filled our sanctuary several times over with standing room only by promoting this activity among all the churches in Collin County. But it just wasn't meant to be. So let's get to today's lesson, finally. First, I want to show you a short video, and I mean short, it's only a couple of minutes long, featuring Tony. Not only does this introduce his book, but continues to introduce Tony to each of you. So here goes.
To the Pittsburgh Steelers as a rookie player, Coach Noll, the first thing he said to us was, football is not your life. Football is a game. And that became a landmark for me because it let me know where I was. I was playing a game, but it wasn't how I was supposed to live. And I think those landmarks are very, very important for us to really have a fundamental understanding of where we are, what's important to us, how we want to live our life. And those landmarks keep us directed, keep us guided. I try to point out to people all the time that character development and staying focused and doing the right things and living for the Lord isn't a one-day process. It's not something that all of a sudden we have. It's not something that once we have it, we're always going to maintain it. It is something that it takes training, it takes work, it takes daily practice to keep that character, to develop that character, and to keep it in the direction we want to go. So to me, it's demonstrating with how I live, how I worship, how I read my Bible, all those things, how I fellowship with other believers, all the things that are going to help me become that person that I want to be. Living that uncommon life, that godly lifestyle, that life that's going to have an impact on other people, it isn't a one-day process. It's not a quick fix. It's something that has to develop. It's something that takes work and takes practice, but it's so important that we want to do that. And it's something that we're going to grow in the Lord, and we're going to stick with it. It's something that has to be top priority in your life. In football, the best players are the guys who never feel like they've arrived. They're always striving to improve. What's your next step in this uncommon life?
Welcome back. As mentioned earlier, Tony's main priority in his life has always been following Christ and supporting his family. Clearly more important than anything else he might accomplish on the football field. Tony happens to be very good friends with Tony Evans. You should all recognize the name Tony Evans. He's the senior pastor at the Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship with a membership just under 10,000. Back in the day, it was common for Tony Evans to ask Tony Dungy, sorry, too many Tonys, what he wanted him to pray for before every big game. Before the 2006 Super Bowl, Dungy's prayer request to Evans was simple. Win or lose, he wanted to make it crystal clear that he belonged to Jesus Christ. He did not want to miss any moment as a witness to Christ. So this sets the foundation for who Tony is, not only for today, but for any of the future lessons I may teach from this book. So let's get started. Before Tony was promoted to the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, he coached in Florida for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who, by the way, just won the Super Bowl a couple of weeks ago. When Tony arrived in Indianapolis, he tells a story about the environment of the Colts organization that sets the stage not only for the title of this book, but for the first topic of character, which I'll get to in a bit. For the Colts, character was a quality just like height, weight, and speed. In fact, the Colts put more emphasis on this area, this quality, than they did any other physical attribute. They even had a term for it, DNDC. Dal will like that. He likes abbreviations and acronyms. DNDC, do not draft because of character. Now, given some of the players that Jerry Jones has drafted over the years, I think it's pretty safe to say that Dallas Cowboys don't have a DNDC focus. In fact, I suspect many professional teams, whether they be football or other sports, don't have either. But the point Tony made in this book was that every year the Colts would pass on players that they had placed in the DNDC category. He said occasionally that they might be proven wrong, but more often than not, Tony indicated in his book that their decision was proved to be justified. I recently saw an old movie with Kevin Costner titled Draft Day. Maybe you've seen it. In this movie, Costner plays general manager of the Cleveland Browns. In the movie, Costner and the Browns have an opportunity to draft the #1 rated quarterback in this year, in the movie business. But they pass on him for a different player. The reason they passed on this quarterback was character. This reminded me of this chapter in Tony's book, Uncommon. In this chapter, Tony is quoted as saying, "What you do is not nearly as important as how you do it." I want to repeat that. What you do is not nearly as important as how you do it. People who tend to bend the rules in order to get ahead usually pay a price for it in the long run. And not only that, Tony feels that at some deep down guttural level, most of these athletes know that they're frauds, his word, that they simply don't have what it takes to accomplish major accomplishments on a level playing field. So let's focus on this a moment. What does the word character mean or stand for? According to Webster's, character is a group of qualities that makes a person unique from all others. For football players, over the course of a season, individual players will experience many moments when their character is challenged, which raises a question about us. How has character for us been challenged? What about over the course of this past year? Or over the course of a lot of years, over a career, over a lifetime? Haven't we been challenged many times when we faced adversity or challenges in life? I know I have. And as I thought about character as I put this lesson together, I reflected back over a lifetime of decisions. No doubt I did some things okay, and maybe some other things not so okay. According to Tony, our true character is often revealed at the crossroads of major life events. We have to know what's right, and we have to choose to do what's right. That is how character is developed. Outwardly, character reflects an inner life commitment to honor and an uncompromised integrity. Now, most of us are no longer part of the corporate world, maybe none of us. So the opportunity once presented to us when we were in the corporate world no longer exists. But regardless of our station in life, people still watch us. Our words and our actions continue to portray our inner character. This past year has certainly been different, with many of us camped out in our respective homes, more or less isolated. But we still have lots of opportunities to show our love for Christ through our words and our actions. I want to close out this part of my lesson on character by quoting Tony. In a common world, becoming an uncommon man or woman begins by cultivating uncommon character. Moving on to the next topic, honesty and integrity. This chapter on honesty and integrity is really rather short in his book, but as I read it again and again, I found myself thinking about how can you have honesty and integrity if you're not a person of good character, even an uncommon character. In his book, Tony used an example when he was a freshman in college, when he had an opportunity to effectively cheat in a big class where the teacher was never present, but instead only showed a video. A lot of students paid $20 to a former student as a way of getting an easy A for a bunch of notes from the previous class. But not Tony. He was not raised this way. His parents didn't raise him to cheat. In fact, Tony quoted his mother as saying, it's sometimes easier to do the wrong thing, but it's always better to do the right thing. Think about that. It's sometimes easier to do the wrong thing, but it's always better to do the right thing. Isn't that the truth? Haven't some of the decisions we've made in our life come down to what's convenient and what's easy versus maybe what's right? Abraham Lincoln once said, you can fool all the people some of the time, and some of the people all the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Makes me think of politics in our country, but I said earlier, I'm not going there. Bottom line, integrity is what we do when nobody is watching. It's doing the right thing all the time, even when it may not be in our best interest. Integrity is that internal compass that directs us to where we know we should go when everything around us may be pulling us in a different direction. Integrity is critical because it's the foundation of trustworthiness in our own eyes. those around us, and most importantly, in God's eyes. So at this stage in our lives, how does this apply to us? I think it's just as important to us as ever. As an example, think about the impact our words and action have on our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. Everything we do and say is watched by somebody. Bottom line, we should hold ourselves to the highest standards as role models to those we come in contact with. In everything that we do and say, we should hope that people see Christ in our words and our actions. Integrity is all about taking care of the little things day in and day out when nobody is watching, because our internal compass is always there. Plus, we all know that God's always watching. The next topic in my lesson today involves humility. A lot of this chapter was devoted to professional athletes. Athletes who, for lack of a better description, promote a look at me attitude. I'm confident that in the world of professional sports, we can all think of individuals who were showboats or otherwise focused on solely blowing their own horn. This immediately reminded me of Gigi's recent lesson of a couple of weeks ago about Hank Aaron. It seems that too many professional athletes believe they must blow their own horn, else nobody else will. But we're reminded in people like Hank Aaron, this is not always true. While I loved rereading this chapter, it all boiled down to the fact that God created us as unique individuals for a unique purpose. You may have already discerned that Tony Dungy is not one to blow his own horn, but rereading this chapter and watching video clips of Tony reminded me how important humility is. Unfortunately, in this corporate world, I've encountered too many top executives who had such a huge ego they expected to be worshipped. Sadly, I even worked for a few. And while we can all probably think of public figures who are showboats or expect to be worshipped, we all know of many others who are immensely successful while not blowing their own horn. I thought about listing some famous people who were showboats as well as those who were not, but then I thought better, maybe it's just better for you to reflect on those that you've come in contact with, those that fit both categories. Tony wraps up this section by reminding us that God created each of us with unique gifts and abilities for a particular place and time, and we should all strive to use these gifts as Christ would have us do. I'm going to close out this lesson with a short prayer. At the end of my prayer, I'm going to show another short video on being uncommon. Now, this video is not part of the Tony Dungy book. It's one I found on the web, like I find a lot of things. But I believe it's a perfect closing for today's lesson. So if you'll bow your head and pray with me. Our most heavenly Father, we have been created in your image with unique gifts, traits, and qualities, gifts that make us each uncommon. This morning, we pray for the courage to use those gifts in a way that not only honors you, but shows the love we have for Christ in all our words and our actions. I pray your presence in our lives. I pray you keep us all safe during these trying times. I pray for our country, for more forgiveness and certainly more unity. And lastly, I pray that when the time is right and we're able to once again be able to return to our church facility, enjoy regular socials with each other, we don't take things like this for granted, because they are a huge blessing to all of us. I ask all this in the name of Christ Jesus. Amen. Y'all have a good week.
Uncommon. Uncommon. Extraordinary, non-standard. Uncommon is the upside down of boring. Uncommon is the opposite of unexamined. Uncommon is, well, uncommon. But what does it take to trip up the typical? Refuse the usual, confuse conventional. How do you be uncommon? To start, Uncommon acts louder than Uncommon speaks. Uncommon communes instead of comments. Uncommon does the hard work. Uncommon always shows up. Uncommon finds the calm in the storm, the kind in the conflict, the novel and the normal. Uncommon summons the strength to listen. Uncommon is the willingness to welcome, the courage to connect, and the endurance to take the next small step again and again and again. Uncommon walks the block to meet its neighbors. Uncommon says yes when asked to mentor or lead. Uncommon stays after school. Uncommon learns the hard lessons and tackles the big questions. Uncommon believes every kid deserves not only a chance, but a destiny. Uncommon shops small, dreams big, and starts to think that one crazy idea might not be crazy at all. Uncommon tries. Uncommon comes together. Uncommon starts something. So whatever you're dreaming, now is the time for Uncommon. And we believe Uncommon is you.